For most of our lives, America has felt untouchable, stable, predictable, and comfortable. We built our routines around the assumption that tomorrow would look just like today. And for decades, it did. People don't realize how quickly a stable country can pivot into instability until the warning signs start stacking faster than anyone can process. Every major collapse in history, every nation that fell into chaos, every society that went from normal life to complete breakdown, they all had early warnings. Not the dramatic Hollywood warnings, the subtle ones, the ones most people ignored because life still looked normal. If you pay attention, America is showing those signs right now. So today, we're breaking down the 5 early warning indicators that tell you a national collapse isn't somewhere in the distant future. It's something already forming beneath the surface. Let's start with the first one. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. When the government, the agencies, the officials, and the institutions can no longer convince the public that they're in control, collapse begins from the top down. When people stop believing official updates, when rumors become more trusted than press conferences, when half the country thinks the other half is the enemy, the unity that holds the nation together cracks. We saw this during the last few years. Conflicting statements, reverse decisions, federal agencies contradicting each other, states ignoring federal directives. When the public stops trusting authority, the system loses the ability to calm a crisis. And without that, every emergency becomes a wildfire. Most people don't really have an idea how thin the supply chain really is. It takes only days, not weeks, not months, days for grocery store shelves to empty if shipments stop. And once they're empty, the panic fills that void instantly. When you start seeing shortages become routine, when medications are backordered, when food, fuel, and manufacturing materials don't arrive on time, that's not a glitch. That's the system groaning under its own weight. And once the supply chain fails nationally, recovery isn't quick. It's measured in months, sometimes years. The moment staple goods become unpredictable, collapse becomes a matter of timing. A society doesn't collapse when the criminals rise. It collapses when the protectors fall. When police departments can't recruit, can't retain, can't respond. When cities can't fill academy classes. When officers are stretched so thin that emergency calls sit unanswered. That's when the cracks widen. We saw glimpses of this when entire departments announced they couldn't cover calls unless someone was actively dying. We saw cities where police forces shrank by 20, 30, even 40%. Once law enforcement becomes reactive instead of proactive, the balance shifts. Crime doesn't just rise, it becomes empowered. And criminals don't wait for a full collapse. They move the second they sense the vacuum. Not Wall Street, not the billionaires, regular people. A collapsing economy doesn't always look like a stock market crash. Sometimes it looks like grocery prices doubling, rent becoming unaffordable, savings evaporating. The middle class families living paycheck to paycheck. Utility bills spiking, people working 2 jobs and still falling behind. When the middle class breaks, the country breaks, because the middle class is the backbone, the workforce, the consumers, the stability. And once they can't sustain themselves, the fallout spreads into everything. Housing, transportation, healthcare, production, distribution. This is the sign that hits the hardest and hits last, right before the system buckles. This is the indicator most people never notice, because prepping used to be a fringe idea, something only a small percentage of Americans took seriously. Not anymore. When households that never stored food start stocking up quietly, when people who laughed at preppers for years are now asking, what should I buy first? When families begin keeping cash on hand, filling water containers, buying generators, installing wood stoves, drilling wells, or planning rural escapes, that's not paranoia. That's their instinct. Human beings can sense instability long before it becomes official. They read the tension. They feel the drift. They know the system is wobbling, even if the news is telling them everything is fine. When the average person starts prepping, it's because they no longer believe the infrastructure around them can protect them. And when millions of people feel the same way at the same time, collapse is no longer a question of if, but when. These 5 signs aren't predictions, they're patterns. Patterns every collapsing nation follows before the fall. And once you recognize them, you can see exactly where we're headed and how quickly things can accelerate. Preparedness isn't panic. Preparedness is paying attention. because the people who survive the next decade are the people who read the signs early and act before the rest of the country wakes up. This is Appalachian Prepper. Stay vigilant, stay ready, and as always, stay safe out there.